Hey everybody. I wanted to have a little bit of discussion on some lessons learned from 3D printing, or even just giving you a little bit of an introduction if you're a gamer watching my channel and you've had maybe an interest, or I piqued your interest in my videos and looking into 3D printing for terrain. I just wanted to just show a couple of the challenges and solutions that I've come across recently and just how it's related to the output of my 3D printer. I've actually had overall, I think, really good success with my 3D printer. I've really been very happy with the quality overall, and in some ways it started out really easy, and if you have an kind of somewhat intuitive mind to just look at the process and make certain tweaks, which it really isn't a set it and forget it kind of process. It's a bit of a hobby into of itself. At least at this point, with the kind of printer I have, it's not. And you know, like this would be an example that I've showed on the channel of something that I was really happy with. Like I thought the quality right off the printer, other than just taking the rim of flash on the bottom, which you always have to cut off with a razor knife, because I use what they call a brim on all my prints for the most part around the edges. It really came out how I would want something like where I would purchase it. Like I really thought it was great. On the other hand, this one actually did not. And this one is more recent than the other one. So you would think that the lessons that I've learned and how I do things would actually improve. Now, this does actually have some more detail and some aspects to the shape, where this pipe has a space on the bottom here. A hole there, you see, like there's some aspects to this, even being round versus just being primarily square, very oddly shaped on the top. This one, I had a problem with what they call stringing, where you actually have little pieces of plastic that jump from detail to detail. So when the nozzle moves from here to here, and it's not just a smooth line, it jumps to it, and there's a little string of plastic that carries along with it. And you can see, you know, stringing can end up being really fine, and you could just wipe it off with your finger, or it can be actually deformative to the surface, where you have to actually sand the surface. There's a little knob where the thing left. And so I wasn't really very happy with this print. It was salvageable, but despite having like really good results before this, even yesterday when I printed this one here, which I really like the outside of this, it's a little hazard containment unit. The inside not only had lots of stringing, you could see where I had to sand a bit in there. So still, this I think is very salvageable, but some of the fine detail on the inside where it was jumping away from, it kind of messed with the detail in there, and it's not great. You know, like that's not great to me. Still usable, you know, for my wargaming terrain for sure, and I think the outside of it looks great. But it caused me to have to reevaluate a few things. And then I had almost my worst disastrous model sometime before this. And I'm going to use that today as my example of just showing you a couple things that I did and a couple things that you'd have to really look out for and expect if you get into this. These are two pieces of scatter terrain. What I have in front of you on the left is what just came off my printer this morning. And what I have on the right is one that I did, I believe, 2 days ago, maybe a little more. Probably longer. I actually did some other prints. I didn't attempt this again after this happened. Now, this was what I would call a series of unfortunate events. So this is the stringing. You know, it's in some cases these strings would be attached to another model that's at another point on the print bed, and this is an example where I would say the model was very much deformed in its surface, more so than just cosmetically. You know, if you really have to do a fair bit in some cases to restore this. And I wiped off the stringing in some cases. The top actually came out quite nice, and I'll talk a little bit about what I did to make that happen. But it's very smooth, even as compared to the sides where you see the normal 3D print, a little bit of the lines. Then also, what to me at the time was even worse, because I didn't understand it, is I had this curvature at the bottom that was happening, where it was just not level at all. Like this is, I guess, concave, not convex, I don't think, concave. and just pulling upwards on the plate. So I had totally solved these issues. This came off the print bed this morning, and to be honest, it's just pretty beautiful as a print from what I would expect. Like, look how flat that is. It to me is really flat. Like, there is that part I had to cut off on the side so it could, show a different visual there, but it's flat, compared. And then this one is clearly not. It's like misshapen. And so what I ended up doing to go from this to this is a couple of things. One of them was kind of dumb in that my print bed, the heating component, which is just a basic component of the machine, stopped working. And it was an electrical issue in the sense of I had a plug with 4 prongs that have a male end that open up. And one of them was just really closed and not making a connection. And all I had to do was take a screwdriver and literally just move the prong out a bit to the way it should be. And now it's working fine, and it has been working excellent. But because what I'd read online, and it proved to be true to a degree, that you don't necessarily with PLA plastic need a warm bed. With certain shapes and certain tolerance levels, my experience is that that's true. That I could print many of these things on a room temperature bed, piece of glass on the surface, and as long as I can make it stick, which we use tape and glue and things like that, techniques for adhesion, that it will actually work. And I'd had good success. And so I just, in addition to ordering a part to make it work in the future, I just continued to print and just adjusted my settings to print on cold glass. Then this happened. And so the point of this on the bottom is that apparently, well, one, it's really cold here in Canada and my printer's in my basement, and so the room gets a little cold at times, chilly. And so normally your heated bed will counteract this, like you'll have a nice warm bed despite the room being colder. But what I'd read was that there's like basically a thermodynamic component to this, where when you have a heated product that has a hot nozzle being made in one portion of it, and then you have a cold bottom, that the actual plastic itself has the ability with those temperature changes and to actually pull away. And that's, there was a bit of a contraction, and that's really what happened. I had basically an unstable temperature environment, for this when I was printing, and because of the size of the miniature and the conformity of the shape, it created the conditions that caused this to pull away. Now, when I printed square things that were much larger, even on a cold surface with a different conformation, I didn't have this result. And so really it's just, I wouldn't call it a roll of the dice. It's just depending on what you're printing, like the shape itself and the size can actually affect whether you'll be able to do certain things under certain conditions if they're not ideal. And so I fixed my heat bed, and now printing on 60 degrees like I always was. And so bottom, totally fine, even though it was even colder yesterday than the day that I printed this. And so that was solved. But now this piece was in some ways a bigger issue for me in the quality of my prints, because regardless of the conditions, the temperature and things like that of the bed and how I was doing it, I was still getting this stringing on certain, and it usually was when I had a lot of details and it was jumping from those details, the nozzle. And so I read that your temperature of your plastic that you're heating up with the nozzle, so your nozzle temperature that you also maintain, usually 200 degrees was what the machine came with and what I saw many people printing with the type of PLA plastic I have, and I had not had any problems before. But now I'm noticing I'm getting all this where I wasn't as much before. Granted, I wasn't jumping from part to part as much before, so this was, when you're printing smaller things, it's nice due to the setup time and the logistics of having to set up a print to be able to do more than one thing if you can. So in the case of this, I printed 6 of these and they all came out like this. This is really kind of unacceptable for me. Like, I just, with all the quality that I've gotten and the rest of the stuff on my table, I could use this as a ruin or something, like a ruin block or whatever, but I really wanted nice, clear, crisp because this is like a nice modern futuristic environment, I wanted to reflect that with something like this, not something like this. And so I ended up doing a couple things. I lowered my temperature, just tried it at 190 instead of 200. And based on what I read, when you do lower the temperature, basically they do recommend that you slow your print down a bit as well. And I'm trying to remember the reason for that. I think it was that, I honestly don't remember the reason I got that advice, but I was reading it and it had something to do with, they recommend that you speed up your travel time from piece to piece when you're not over something, and that made sense because you just didn't want, the stringing can partly be that it's still running, and you didn't want like goop to be traveling like over empty space. But then the other thing too is there's a setting called retraction, which I never used in the past, and basically the little widget that actually the extruder that basically extrudes your plastic, that has a little wheel that moves your string of plastic along, and you can actually cause it to go in reverse when it's not supposed to be printing. So when you travel from one piece to another and you're going over this empty space, rather than printing on here, when you jump from here to here, you can actually pull the plastic back into the machine slightly. And so between increasing the travel speed and removing the moving the plastic back into the nozzle, and reducing the temperature of the plastic so it actually isn't as liquidy, as it could be. I went, and then of course, and actually getting my bed to work, I went from this lopsided thing with all this string to this, just with really just tailoring settings, particularly the stringing. And so I wanted to just give people just an idea that, there is a little bit of a component to this that's not just setting it up, putting in, plugging it in, loading a file and printing it. There's quite a bit of hands-on adjusting. I know that there are folks that watch the channel that are more experienced than me at 3D printing, and I know there are folks that know a lot about 3D printing that watch, but for those of you that are not as familiar, I just wanted to give that impression. Lastly, what I'll just say is one of the things that really improved the quality of my prints too is this setting that you can use called ironing. And basically what happens is when you actually print, rather than just having like a rough surface on top where the layers are, which you can, let's say, you can see it here when I go like this, you can see the lines. They're not, because I think this is printed really well, it's not that apparent just when you look at it like that, but when you put it in the light and without paint on it, you can see it a little bit. On the actual top, which is here, it's less pronounced. Although you can still see that, it's totally smooth to the touch. And actually when I put paint on it, there's no way that you would actually, on these raised surfaces, see any lines whatsoever. And it's because with ironing, it runs the hot nozzle over the model lightly when it's finished, and it basically smooths it out on all. You can do it so it's just on the top layer. You can do it on all raised surfaces. I've been doing it on all raised surfaces because I really do like the look. And so that's actually been something that's really improved the look of my prints, I think, when they're done as well. So yeah, I've been, outside of this little 3D printing piece here, I've been working, he's not finished, on this guy here from Infinity, and this is just meant to be scatter terrain, just cover and things like that, which will work really great. And yeah, now I'm quite happy that I kind of overcame that challenge of this, and now I'm able to produce that, and even doing multiple ones at the same time. So, okay. So, hope you guys enjoyed this little discussion on 3D printing. Found it interesting, particularly those of you that might be thinking of getting into it. Take care.